and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're in our series called Public Land Beating the Odds, where we're looking at the strategies, mindsets, and approaches to be successful on public land despite the many challenges that come with it. And again, the season theme is how to consistently take the top deer where you hunt. In this episode, I'm with Michael Veine, a longtime outdoor writer with a lot of experience in the hard-to-hunt big woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It's actually the second half of our interview, the first half of which hasn't been released yet. So when I mentioned the first episode, that actually has not aired yet, but will in the future regarding private land. So if you hunt large areas of public and have a hard time finding quality spots that produce, this episode is for you. And you can download our free journal to use with this podcast. That's really going to help. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What is Michael's main criteria for finding the best potential spots to take big woods bucks? When does Michael focus his precise efforts, and where does he focus these for the best odds hunting in large, expansive tracts of public land? What strategy does he use to simultaneously leverage private and public land for maximizing his strategic hunts during the season? How many public land spots does Michael have and say you need, and why is this a big key according to him? How have wolves changed how he hunts and when he hunts for more success? And there's a lot more good stuff in there as usual, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. Today we're going to talk about public land hunting strategies. There's a ton of guys out there into public land hunting now, and Mike has a ton of experience hunting all over the place, specifically here in Michigan, which is high pressure, if you understand, the situation here, and just with a lot of success. So that's what we're going to dig into today is public land hunting and different tactics to be successful there. So, Mike, you mentioned in the last talk we had that you probably hunt about 50% private land, 50% public or so. And what is a way, let's start here, how do you find these spots, these good spots on public ground to be potentials to look at to deer hunt?
A lot of it is just through many miles of scouting. You're going to put some miles on your boots, but it's also a lot of reconnaissance where you're looking at maps, online tools, paper maps. I have both, and trying to find those areas where you think that the hunting pressure is going to be low. I mean, where I hunt up in the UP, I pick out areas that have not been hunted for at least 2 years. I mean, nobody. If anybody's in there hunting, I keep tabs on these spots, especially during firearm deer season. I go in there and I check spots a lot. I do a lot of scouting during firearm deer season. And I'm only scouting for hunting pressure. And I'll find these areas that are just not getting hunted. They're being overlooked. They may be an area that just got clear cut, and people just a lot of people think that clear cutting a forest down is terrible, and they don't want to hunt it anymore because it looks ugly. But it's good for deer hunting, and it also keeps a lot of hunters away too. And you can find some great spots in those recently cut areas. That's some of my primaries I check out, and I do a lot of my scouting during my bird hunts. And a lot of them bird hunting sessions are going to be in the same type of habitat that's going to be good for deer too. And I just put a lot of miles on bird hunting 40, 50 days out of the year, and getting back into those deep, wilderness type areas that are just hard to access. And that's one thing, when you do hunt like I do on public land where you're getting way back into the woods and hunting these remote areas where there's low pressure, is you got to be in good shape. And you've seen me before. We've met through arm wrestling circles. I keep myself in good shape year round.
Yeah.
When I go into hunting season, I'm getting in even better shape because I know that that's some of the toughest physically demanding things I'm going to do all year is going to be getting back into those areas and hunt. And you got to be able to be in good enough shape, and especially me at 63, to be able to drag a deer out, that might be a mile back into the woods. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's getting tougher as I get older, even being in good shape, but it's important.
Yeah, we mentioned this on the first podcast. Mike and I met arm wrestling, and he gives like a recap on the last episode. But he's an outdoor writer. Are you a world champ? Like what is What's your
I did get 2 silver medals at World Championships, but I never won. That's a goal of mine still. I'm going to do it. I've won national championships many times. I've won state championships many times in probably four different states, I think now.
hmm,
And it's a hobby. It's not something. It's not something I do for anything financial or anything like that. It's just a hobby,
yeah,
just
but
like my hunting and fishing is these days.
I think that's an important point to make. Yeah, the idea of staying in physical shape, and it's one thing to just do it to hunt, and I think there's that's part of it. But I also think having some other hobby that helps you motivate you to stay in shape is also good. Like what you're doing there, it only
Definitely
helps. It
helps
only
a lot. It
helps.
keeps my weight down because you're making weight classes, and it just motivates you. I quit arm wrestling about 40 years ago, I think it was. I arm wrestled back in the 19 like late 70s and early 80s when I was in my 30s, and then I quit for 30 years, and I got back into it about 10 years ago. And I quit because, for an oddball reason, it has to do with bow hunting. In that when I draw my bow back when I'm training like I am right now, it don't bend further than that. I mean, this is maximum it goes on a bend. And trying to draw back, it didn't work right.
Hmm.
It'd be pressured. I couldn't get accurate shots when I was training heavily. So when I quit arm wrestling for 30 years, I was just acting. I did it because I wanted to bow hunt. And it was one of my passions, and I just couldn't do both sports at the same time. But I don't know, back about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I switched over from a compound bow to a crossbow just so I could get back into arm wrestling.
Oh,
It had
okay.
nothing to do with any injuries or anything like that I had. But I wanted to get back into arm wrestling. A friend of mine was still doing it. He was my age, and he was still one of the top guys in the country, and if not the world. And so if he could do it, and he convinced me to give it a try, and I switched over to a crossbow and started training for arm wrestling again. So it was a little
Interesting.
bit of a transition doing that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably
But
about the time I met you.
crossbows are an effective weapon. They're I was deadly with it with a compound. And don't get me wrong. I used to win tournaments, 3D tournaments and things like that. I was a good shot. But with a crossbow, it's more deadly than a compound bow. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, you mentioned all this scouting you do, and you're really scouting other hunters, right? I mean, you're doing both. So you mentioned
Absolutely.
the bird hunting, which is another hobby. And in segment one, we talked about how a lot of guys will pressure their land way too much, right? And especially retired guys. But if you own property, you want to hunt it, right? And so what I run into all the time is these guys that don't have other options, right? And so they wind up over hunting their land because they want to hunt it and it's the only place they have to go, right? And so they just are their own worst enemy. They blow it out uh, real quick during the season, right? And so you talked about how you have some public land spots to keep your private land fresh, and you also bird hunt, and that gets you. That's a big form of scouting, right? Right there, just having this
It is.
other thing you like to do. You see all this deer sign, like, oh, make a note. I'm gonna come back and scout that for deer hunting, and I do that too, as far as just spring scouting and finding this stuff, but a lot of scouting. So you have scouting for deer, but you also have scouting for other hunters, and I think that's really important uh, because a lot of guys telegraph where they're hunting, right? Um, Tell us a little bit more about that, just the difference there. But like, what do you look for when you're scouting other hunters? Like, you're just driving around parking lots. What are you doing when you're looking for that?
Well, it's pretty simple because most hunters in the UP, anyways, where I hunt, they hunt. Well, take their truck into the woods or an ATV into the woods, and they leave tracks. And then you can find their parking spots, and then from there, it's just it's not hard. It's not hard to tell if an area is being pressured. It doesn't have to necessarily be a spot, because up in the UP, where baiting is legal, if somebody's hunting in an area, they're going to draw the deer in, and more than likely they're going to shoot some of the deer out of that area. And there's not that many deer up there to begin with. So if you do have somebody that's in there taking some of the deer out, you're better off just looking somewhere else. So I keep tabs on those spots. That one year after another, just if a spot hasn't been hunted in 2 years, a lot of this is determined. I'll find spots during maybe September or October while I'm out bird hunting, but during that firearm deer season, that has been the biggest tool that I've had for finding those great spots. just finding areas that are not being hunted, because you can go in there during that firearm deer season when there's snow on the ground, and you can really tell. You can find tracks in the snow and find out where people have been coming and going, and places to avoid and places to look even harder at. And I've got some great spots I've been hunting for many years up in the UP on public land. That one spot I hunted. I think I've hunted it 10 times. And I've shot 6 bucks out of it. And timing is everything on those spots. And so the areas I'm hunting up there, I'm looking for pinch points and natural funnels. This is nothing that I'm setting up man-made. The only thing I do that's man-made is I'll rig up a tree for a saddle. And I usually typically don't even clear out any shooting lanes, because I'm just looking for like natural spots where I can slip in there and I can just do minimum work to get into a tree and hunt. And these spots are along clear cuts a lot where logging has occurred. A lot of times when they clear cut an area, where there's aspen coming up, they'll come up right up to the edge of a swamp. And along those edges, you're going to have areas where the wind will kick on those trees and it uproots them and knocks them over and creates these natural funnels. And some of these times these big blowdowns will pile up for hundreds of yards, and there'll be a spot where the deer come through, where they can get around that stuff. That'd be one type of funnel. Land terrain features where you're looking at swampy stuff that is just impenetrable. With ridges that run through it. And deer love to run those ridges, especially bucks during the rut. And during my public land hunting, I typically focus on the rut period, not early in the season so much. Although I do get out sometimes on public land, during the first few weeks of October. But it's that third week of October and on. That's when I really start focusing on those public land spots, when them bucks are cruising more during they're on their feet.
So, if I'm reading you right, part of your game plan is starting on your private piece, which I don't know if we mentioned in this episode is 200 acres in the UP. Starting there in this kind of web-like pattern from your cabin out, so you're keeping pressure low and you just keep working your way out. If by the end of October, let's say, you don't have both your tags filled, because we have 2 tags in Michigan, 2 buck tags, then you might transition to some public land there. Is that a general kind of game plan I'm getting?
That sums it up pretty good.
Okay.
I like to hunt on my own private property better because it's easier. I've got access trails, things. It's a lot easier to get in and out. If I get a deer, it's a lot easier. The spots I'm hunting on public land, well, not all of them are this way. I'll get into that too as well. Are most of them are way back into the woods, long ways back, but some of them are just these little ignored areas that are right along the road where people just never hunt. They're all going back in, 4 miles in with their ATVs. And they're missing this one little spot right along a county road. And I found some excellent spots in areas like that. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about public land hunting, like in southern Michigan too, like in extremely heavily pressured areas. Like I grew up in, I lived in I grew up in the Manistee area, hunting the national forest there. It's kind of where I cut my teeth. But I lived down in the Chelsea area for 25 years and hunted, lived right in the Waterloo recreation area. So I hunted in there, and I actually figured out how to be an effective hunter in probably one of the most super pressured areas of the state. And in this area, on opening day of firearm deer season, you can't even find a parking place there because it just gets jammed. And there's people in there small game hunting, all year too. It's not just deer hunting. So you talk pressure, that's the heaviest pressure.
Right.
And I was able to find hunting spots there that were really good on public land by just being extremely using strategies that were above and beyond the normal. Like I found this one spot by finding out that this one guy who owned property right next to this state land parcel was an anti-hunter, and he was vehement. He'd like scream and holler at his neighbors if he saw them, hunting too close to their property line and whatever. And he was just a real grouchy old man, but he was an anti-hunter. But he created a sanctuary for deer. He had like over 100 acres of property next to that state land. And it was a state land parcel that was very swampy in there too, and hard to access. So it was like a doubly good thing. Most hunters wouldn't want to go through that swampy stuff. You had to wear, hip boots to get in there, and crawl on your hands and knees to get under some of the brush as well too when you weren't going through the water. And then right along, I got within like 150, 200 yards of his property back in there. I saw all kinds of bucks, quality bucks. But I didn't want to ever even shoot one back in there because I wanted to make sure it had to be like a 15-yard shot. It's like a perfect double lung opportunity because I would never want to have that deer run onto his property because he would never get permission to get it.
Right.
So that'd be something that really big and something that I had a perfect shot at. So I passed up a lot of deer in that area, but had a lot of fun hunting it. That's just one example of kind of an oddball way to find a good spot. But there was other areas in that Waterloo area that I was able to dig out too that were pretty good, and not by going way back in either. It was more just finding those parcels that were close to private property that just were being ignored, even close to the road.
Yeah, I think that, and we have a public land guide that guys can download with some different approaches on there, and that's one of them that I highlight. I call it the Disneyland mentality, where people talk so much now about going deep and all this stuff that when I get back there, a lot of times, oh, here's a bunch of tree stands, right? Because everybody's reading the same playbook.
They
And
are.
so it's not going deep. It might be if that's where guys are not at,
Well,
but
I used to find spots that
it's
were like autumn olive, thick autumn
overlooked.
olive patches that were just you had to crawl. People won't crawl. You had to crawl on your hands and knees
Yep.
to get through underneath these brush and stuff. You wouldn't make trails to get there. You crawl through these spots and right along the road, and there'd be awesome deer hunting there. Just little
Yeah, it's
pockets.
these overlooked spots. I
Yeah,
think is the key word. Overlooked places other guys aren't willing to go. But yeah, overlooked is key. And even this, I don't know if you do any of this, but like ground hunting, because there's a stat, I think it's 90 some percent of hunters hunt from an elevated position. So either a blind or a tree stand or a saddle or something like that. Which means that if there's an area with no trees but it's good cover, there's a real good chance nobody's hunting that at all, right?
that's a very good point.
And just having, hunting the other hunters, looking at what they're doing, and because deer are going to react to that. So what's overlooked? Where are the deer actually going? Huge key.
I hunt on the ground quite a bit actually. On my own private property that I have a lot of ground blinds on there that are archery only ground blinds, and I do hunt on the ground on public land too. I'd rather be up in a tree stand if I have a choice, just
Right.
because it's a lot better percent control. And but being on the ground, there's advantages in certain places where you just don't have a good tree. And I mentioned those autumn olive thickets like that. You might not have any trees in those areas,
Yep.
and sitting on the ground is the only way you get them. And sometimes that's going to be a right in your face type hunting situation. One of the biggest bucks I ever had in my life was in one of those autumn olive patches, and he worked his way in within 25 yards of me. If he'd have been 20, I could have had a shot at him, but there was just a few branches in the way, and I couldn't get a shot at him. He was a great big booner.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second too. Maybe some ground tactics, but I'll just say, yeah, I have a story of a buck too. I think it was 2018. This heavily pressured public land spot, and all these guys were going deep into the swamp and all this stuff and pressuring that, and I wound up missing a buck right up by the road that I observed them coming out. There was three different bucks, and I wound up pushing in there the next day. It was the same wind. They did the same thing. I was hunting from the ground, right? And other guys totally overlooked that because there was zero trees there, right? But the deer were there, right? So it's where are the deer? Where aren't the hunters type thing. But what are some things you'll do then? Because hunting on the ground obviously is harder, right? How do you do that? Like, what does that look like for you? Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. If you struggle to find quality spots to hunt away from other hunters on public land, I know how you feel. Recently, I was hunting public land and had a crew nearby making a lot of noise about a half an hour before dark. When I got to the parking lot, I saw why. They had shot a buck, which they now were gutting in the parking lot. It was clear to me they had little concern for other hunters in this area by both of these actions. Now, I knew there was potential for this and hunted that spot anyways, but a sure cure for this is to go where what I'll call lazy hunters won't go. If someone is too lazy to drag a deer elsewhere to gut it, they're probably the same in their hunting locations, and you can easily find areas they won't go. This doesn't guarantee getting away from everyone, but does put some distance between you and this type of hunter. It's something to think about when sharing our public lands with a lot of other people. And if you want to become a more deadly and consistent hunter on big whitetail, you need some exact tools and mindsets to do that. So I invite you to Deer IQ Academy's Advanced Whitetail Workshop, which is now taking registrations, where we'll teach these exact things. This workshop is a 2-day immersion experience, including classroom mastery sessions of my personal success strategies, in the field application of workshop material, roundtable discussions with like-minded hunters just like you, and in-depth QA sessions. It's a packed weekend and one-of-a-kind growth opportunity sure to challenge and transform participants into more deadly hunters. Pre-register at the link in the notes to secure your spot in this very high IQ opportunity and big investment in your future as a whitetail hunter. Okay, and now let's get back to the podcast. What are some things you'll do then? Because hunting on the ground obviously is harder, right? How do you do that? Like, what does that look like for you?
You need complete camouflage head to toe, including a face mask of some sort. A lot of people omit their hands too. You want to have gloves on that are camouflage. Everything's got to be covered up. And when they're coming in that close to you on the ground, they're looking you right in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And I have like a camouflage net with the eye holes like this. That's like wire that goes around your eyes that you can kind of form around your eyes. And I wear that in a tree stand as well too. I always have my face covered up. I believe 100% camouflage. Because deer will look up at you in a tree, and you got to make sure that they're not going to spot that glistening little white patch up there. That is your face.
Right.
I believe in that 100%.
Yeah, I had somebody comment, I think, on a video recently about, well, I just get up in a tree and that eliminates the deer's ability to see your vision. And I was like, well, where I hunt in Michigan, and this is no exaggeration, on public land in Michigan, the deer are trained to look up in trees. I've seen deer come through the woods and stop and just start looking up, and then they see a blob. They see a blob and they're gone, right? Because they know they're so pressured. So, camo's key, and especially down on the ground. I think it's 30 degrees is what they can see. So if you're above that and they don't look up, okay, you're out of their line of sight. But obviously they can tilt their head if they know to do that. So that's key, and really blending in, because I would guess too, like, not all camouflage is equal, right? What does this area look like where you're hunting on the ground, and will your camouflage actually blend in? Because a lot of camos out there,
different camo suits for sure.
Yeah, a lot of camos out there are terrible. Just to be honest, they don't, or they're specific to a certain environment, right? They might blend in okay here, but not over here. And so being real specific about that is important, because if you go back and listen to, there's a podcast about deer vision, the science of deer vision. It's pretty interesting, but deer don't see detail, but they see very well in a wide 300-degree range, right? But they're seeing movement, obviously. So all you need to do is break up your form, basically. So is your camo going to do that for you? Is just something I'll throw in there as something super important. So let's talk about preparation. So you have, your private land, which you can control, and that's one great thing about private lands. You can control what happens on the land, right? Public, exact opposite. So how do your approaches differ from I'm going into private land versus I'm going into public land?
Well, my private land setups aren't necessarily going to be dependent upon natural terrain features more. Like, I can manipulate things. I'm a big hinge cutter. A lot of people hinge cut trees to make habitat on their property. Well, I've got tons of good brushy lowland habitat. And so I'm hinge cutting trees just to make sure I'm funneling deer in the right places so they can't get in behind me and come through areas where I can get shots at them where they're not going to win me. And on public land, you're kind of at the mercy of nature. So you have to have all those. You have to have a lot of the stands on public land for all the different wind directions covered. And that's another thing. A lot of people they don't put enough effort in to have enough stands set up. I mean, realistically, you need at least probably on public land, I'm going to say at least 4 or 5 stands for every possible wind direction.
In one spot. In one spot.
Not necessarily in one spot. One, just in the general area where you're hunting.
Right.
Lots of different spots is better. So you're going to be putting pressure in different areas.
Right.
But you gotta have to have that, because things can go wrong. Somebody can move into an area You could have
Yep.
predators come through one area, and kind of booger it up for a week or so. Just deer can change their patterns, so you need to have that versatility with all those stand setups. And on public land, it's far more important to have the good choices and lots of choices compared to private land even.
Yeah, because there's so many variables that could screw it up at any minute, right?
It's
And
all
I
a lot of
think you
work. I mean,
mentioned,
on private land you're manipulating your habitat and having to do a lot of things, and it's a lot of work that way. On public land, you're scouting and doing a lot of setups. You have to have a lot more setups.
yeah, how
So
many
it's
setups do
work
you
either way.
have on public?
Um, I've probably forgotten about more of them than I actively hunt nowadays. I mean, they're probably active right now that I could walk into and hunt next year. I'd say at least 30, 40, something
Yeah,
like that, maybe.
yeah, you need a lot.
Could be more.
I think guys underestimate that. I think during COVID, I had extra time off from work, and being in the spring, it was perfect time to scout, and kind of prep trees or your entry and exits. I think I had 60 spots at that point on public land, and people think that's excessive, but over the years, you'll kind of refine those and realize the ones that are good at certain times, ones that aren't. And like you said, at any point in time, one of those could be hot or turn cold, or someone move in and hunt it, and it's over, right? And you know, we mentioned that one human encounter in a spot, a deer has learned, right? They're going to avoid that spot. So if you see another hunter around, it's almost like, okay, I'm out of here. Go to option B or C or D. And if you don't have those options, that's when you see
Yeah.
guys just wearing spots out. You see guys getting very aggressive or like territorial, like this is my spot. And it's like, oh, it isn't, but it's because they just have one spot, right?
Well, one friend of mine, John Eberhart, he told me one time that he had over 80 spots set up,
Yep.
and I didn't have quite that many at that time. I had to step up my game because I couldn't have him have more than me.
Right. Right.
So maybe I had 80 at that time, but I don't have quite that many now. Maybe as I'm getting older.
Right, but the idea is you got to have options, right? Even if you
Yes.
have private land too, the public is a good way to keep pressure off the private, and you're monitoring spots on public. One of the things I do that, after that, I kind of look at it as the first few days or maybe even the first week, you might get a crack at deer on public land that haven't been pressured yet, right? And so you get this first quick few hunts on deer that you've been scouting all summer, right? And then the game changes. Then they know they're being hunted because of everybody else. And it's almost like I flip the script and I just start looking at other hunters. Like, okay, what are they doing now? Like, you have to start observing the other hunters a ton, just to know what's going on and where the deer might be. Uh, What are some keys then, to success on public land? Maybe that we haven't mentioned. So you've scouted these way ahead of time. You've found some bird hunting. You scouted the years before to see where the hunting pressure is historically. Um, what are some other keys that I guess I've left off here as far as you think for hunting public land
Well,
successfully?
you can talk about stand setups. I mean, there's two places that I like to hunt. One is going to be on the ground. My preference though is going to be up in a tree, and my tree stand setups are high. I mean, I won't pull any punches in that one. A lot of people don't want to go up as high as I do. My average tree stand height is probably 25, 30 feet. And I like to be right up in that zone. And I like to have a lot of background cover behind it, not just be relying on being high, but
Yep.
I want to have some evergreen trees in behind me. And I hunt a lot of areas that have balsam trees and pine trees and cedar trees especially. And those cedar trees are the best trees to have stands in because they won't have a lot of branches going up. And you get a big cedar tree or a big pine tree as well too. You can get up in those trees easily. Uh, I don't like to be in those mid zones. I mean, sometimes you can get away with being in that 15 to 20 foot zone, but the deer will spot you there more.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to have a lot of really good cover around you, especially in behind your stand, maybe even out to the sides, so you're covered so the deer can't see you and you don't get silhouetted. I do have some stand setups that are in that 15 to 20 foot high zone, but Not very many of them. Usually they're way up there or they're on the ground. That's my preference.
What else are you looking for? So height, and sometimes, at least for me, it's like it's hard to do. Like, okay, that's the tree I got to be in. I can only get so high because of this or that, the limbs and whatnot. So there's
Well,
some
there's limiting factors sometimes based on the
right.
tree and things like that.
What are some other keys for you on public as far as your setup goes? I guess so. Height. Um, you mentioned funnels, like finding those natural
Well,
funnels and different
that that
things.
that entry and exit route is extremely critical to be able to get into that stand, especially. It's more critical to get into that stand without being detected than it is to get out of it. Because you can always like
Hmm.
hunt somewhere else the next day; it doesn't matter. But getting
Right.
into that stand, you have to make sure that you're getting in there undetected. That's probably one of the reasons why if I'm hunting way back in the woods in a public land area, I'm not going to hunt early in the morning because sneaking into that stand in the dark when it's all quiet and crispy in the morning is just you're defeating yourself. You're going to let every deer know that you're there. That they're hunting them. I want to sneak in there. Typically, I'll wait until the wind picks up in the morning, say 9 o'clock in the morning. Then I'll walk in and I'll hunt the rest of the day.
Hmm.
That's been my key strategy for hunting public land. I'm killing more deer during the middle of the day, anyways, since the advent of wolves in the area, and taking advantage of that by being in that stand from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock. That's prime time. Is critical. And a lot of people want to get out there in the morning. They come back in for noon, spend a few hours lounging around, getting sneaky at camp, and they go back out again in the afternoon, and you know they're missing out on prime time hunting, and they're screwing up their spots by doing it.
Yeah, and so let me kind of set the stage here for what you just said, because I think you said earlier you usually hunt around rut time. Is that correct?
When I'm hunting on public land spots, I'm hunting mostly during the rut.
Yep. So that is good to remember, right? You're also hunting in spots that don't have, probably, I'm guessing, they don't have clear cut food to bed, uh, like movement type things, because you're not hunting around agricultural type fields, right? This is more big woods type hunting. Is that right?
It's big woods. You're looking for funnels and trails and things like that to hunt on, where there's going to be areas where the deer are concentrated.
Yeah. So, coming and going. So, for example, if I'm hunting more easy to predict food to bed type cover, like ag fields to this bedding area, uh, sometimes you can get away with, and I like to go in super early in the morning before they will transition back to there. But in that type of situation, you don't necessarily know. There's no clear cut where the deer will probably be as much in that type of situation. And you're going in when it's the calmest part of day, you're crunching around in frosty leaves and stuff, and that, that's a detriment. So it is subject to, I think, the situation there as well, for where you hunt, and just point that out to guys, because it is a little bit situational, I think. And in the middle of the day, you're catching them in the rut and they're moving. And you mentioned the wolf thing too, where the wolves are actually driving them to be adapt and be more active in daylight or
Yeah,
midday.
I've actually had wolves chase deer past my stand before, and couldn't get a shot at either one of them. But well, the another thing too, when you're hunting these public land spots like this, and you're hunting deer that are just passing through, and just get random. I mean, it pays to be able to overlook a big area. That's why I love hunting on the edge of clear cuts, because those deer sometimes come right through those clear cuts, and they might be 200 yards away, and I've got this little thing called a dynamite rattler. It's an old thing. They probably don't even make it anymore. It's like these plastic pegs that are secured with rubber bands almost going around them, and you just kind of rattle them like that. You
Mm,
can make a rattling noise, and then your grunt calls. You can call to them. You can get them to come to you because they're looking, they're hunting, they're out looking for does. You can get them to respond to
right.
calling. Like that's the best time of the year to do that. So if you can overlook these bigger areas like that, you can actually spot them deer coming through and call them. And I've done it before, and actually harvested deer that way. So
Interesting. As we wrap up here, Mike, do you have a takeaway or story that you would like to share or could share that kind of puts some of this together as far as public land hunting?
well, like I said, there's one area that I've hunted. And I've hunted this spot now, I think 10 times over the last like 15 years, and I've killed 6 bucks out of it. So it's a natural funnel along a clear cut. I haven't been able to hunt this thing for the past 3 or 4 years just because of the timing of it, and I've been getting my deer early in the season, and
Hmm.
the deer and the trees are starting to grow up in that area more. But that area, that spot right there, is just a classic funnel. And where I had the blowdowns that were in behind the stand from when the cedars blew over after they did the logging, and it created like this perfect funnel where these deer come right through. And with anything south or west wind, it's an absolute beautiful spot. And it's just golden. If you can find those types of areas like that, you got to get out there and you just got to search. And it's constantly changing as things evolve in the woods. So it's a lot of fun. I love hunting on public land because I love to go out and find those new spots. Can't do that on private property because I know my property like the back of my hand.
Right.
The only thing I can do is maybe enhance a stand or something. I can't go out and discover areas. I like that about public land. I love to go out there and discover. So I guess that's my takeaway is just to motivate people to get out there and really get into finding those spots because that's the most fun thing about hunting public land. And we're
Yep.
lucky in Michigan that we have millions of acres of public land to hunt. We're so
We
many state
do.
east of us.
We do have a lot. Well, thanks, Mike, for coming on and just sharing some things about public land hunting. I think guys will get something out of that and get them thinking. So, again, thanks for coming on. All right, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges. Think about how you can find areas no one has hunted for years, like Michael does. What are you doing in the off season to get out there and find these new spots to add to your portfolio of locations? Also, download our free public land guide with 8 expert strategies to help you find good deer and beat the crowds on public land. And that wraps up our series on public land hunting. Next time I share the next step in the whitetail pyramid of success, strategic data analysis, how you take data and use it to make very, very high odds hunts. You won't want to miss that episode, and I'll see you then.